So this week I have been tagged by Leo from A Little Book Life for the Fit for Reading book tag, and this is kind of like a subtle way of me saying that I don't have much material for Bookish avec this week. But anyway, I think there's no harm done in answering a tag in Bookish avec moi. So here it is. There's a little bit of fun here. There are a few questions here, 7 questions altogether, and each of the questions they are kind of associated with a kind of sports or sports-related terms, and it's kind of interesting. The original tag is by Sarah MG Reads, and I'm gonna link both of those videos in the description box. So let's start. The first question, it's related to Zumba, and I've never done any Zumba before, but I've seen a lot of people doing it. It looks kind of fun because it's kind of like dancey, and I like dancing, so maybe sometime later. Wait, I think I have done Zumba once before a marathon, so yeah, but it was a very, very light Zumba. It was kind of unregulated. Everyone was just doing their own moves because they couldn't keep up with the trainers at the front. So but anyway, the question: name a twist and turny book that was fun to read. One that I can remember was Possession by A.S. Byatt. So this book was interesting because for me it did feel like it was filled with kind of like twists and turns, because it was indeed a book about some kind of investigation. So the book is about these 2 scholars, modern scholars. Each of them are studying their own respective Victorian authors, and one of the scholars, he found a letter written by the author that he was studying, and it was kind of surprising, because considering the fact that the writing of that author is not really, it does not feel like it agrees with the writing of the other Victorian author. But so it was kind of surprising that they have some sort of relationship, some sort of liaison on that. So it was kind of interesting. It became kind of like an interesting new discovery in academia. So he reached out to the scholars of the other Victorian author, and they started to investigate what was the whole deal behind their relationships and all that. And while they were doing this, of course, there are also other parties interested in investigating that too, and discover those things for themselves and get the credits and all that. So it was really interesting. It felt like a cat and mouse chase kind of book, kind of fast-paced at certain places, but then you also have portions that kind of explored the lives of those fictional Victorian authors. So it's a really nice book with so many layers, but it definitely for me has some twists and turns. So the second one is CrossFit. I've never done any CrossFit, obviously, and the question is, what was the most intense book you've read? So for intense, it's definitely William Faulkner. And my first William Faulkner is I Lay Dying, which I read while I was at college. It was for a class, of course, and there was a teacher, but it was really difficult to get into the book in the beginning. In fact, even after I finished the book, if I were to reread that book, it would be quite difficult as well, because that book is very difficult. It's very challenging. It has a lot of vernacular language in it. The writing is just kind of jumbled up. It's not so linear and not very conventional, not grammatical in the sense that, you know, the kind of grammar that you are used to, you know, conventional grammar. So there is a lot of challenges for me when it comes to reading as I lay dying. So this book was definitely quite intense, although I do think that the story is kind of nice. It's very juicy, and it's really rewarding once you get into the story. The third question, Burpees Suck. Well, burpees kind of suck. Is for a book you hated, and of course have some books that I hated, but most of them I DNF'd. But for the books that I hated and finished, I must say the most recent one was The Inheritance of Lost by Kirsten. That book just didn't work. There were so many things about that book that just came across as kind of pretentious to me. So that book, the story set in India around the 1980s or so, and so it tells a story that concerns a lot with race, politics, immigration, all of those things, really heavy subjects. Could be juicy stuff, but at the end it kind of became kind of vapid in a way, and the writing style was not to die for. The dialogues were kind of juvenile, and it's funny because the ones that I call juvenile are actually dialogues of actual juvenile characters, but somehow they keep on talking in all caps, and many times after they finish their sentences there would be multiple exclamation points or question marks. It's just so weird, because that book won the Booker Prize, but the way that it was written, it felt like a BuzzFeed online article. It has a lot of lists, so it is partly a listicle, and it was also kind of a word vomit at some places, so it was really unsatisfying. I did not enjoy that very much. So I read that book as a buddy read with Sue from Sue Tan, and I think both of us didn't really enjoy that book. But you know, at least I get to finish a book that I can say that I dislike and I gave a low rating on. Next question, Intramural Sports. What book were you assigned to read at school but ended up liking, so you couldn't wait to read it at night? There were many books that were assigned at school, but one book that stood out was The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. That book was interesting because it has so many layers. It has multiple narratives, one that takes place in 20th century Russia, and another one that takes place sometime around the time of Jesus. And those two narratives, at first they kind of felt like separate from each other, but they kind of converge at the end. Another part about that book that was really interesting is the characters. The characters are so colorful because that book essentially is about the devil and his posse visiting Russia in the 20th century and causes tons of havoc. And there was so many weird stuff happening in that book. It was just so interesting, so fun to read. And you know, the characters, they are not just simply human characters. There were giant talking cat, there were vampires, and you know, magical stuff also happened in that book. I think there was also this cream that caused you to be able to fly or something like that. So if you are interested in that kind of stuff, then this book is definitely for you. For me, it is definitely something that was really fun. It was like a party. I can't remember if I actually like felt compelled to read it at night, stay up to read it at night, because I've never felt compelled to do that with any book so far. Usually my desire to sleep is stronger. So but I think it counts for this question. Next one, running/jogging. Name a book that follows all the standard tropes but you still enjoyed. So essentially, name a book that's pretty vanilla. Earlier this year, I read a book by Japanese author Hiro Arikawa. It's called The Trampoline Class Chronicles. And this book, it fits many of the conventions of what you would kind of find in a light novel, in a kind of YA novel, or at least novels geared towards younger audience. In East Asia. This one was written originally in Japanese, and but you could kind of see this kind of tropes happening in Chinese written books also. So essentially, it is this book about a guy and his cat, and something is going to happen with the guy. And so he has to kind of give the cat to another person, and in that journey there's this growth going on, you know, some sort of revelation on the guy's history, and revelation on the cat's history, and how they became together as man and cat. And you know, I just think that these things are kind of mushy, and YA Asian works, especially the ones that I used to read when I was a teenager, back when I was still at secondary school, they were mushy. They were like super mushy, and those were the kinds of things that you would expect. Next question is Jazzersize. A book that you enjoyed that is outdated or published long ago. So when I see this question, I can't help but to think about one of the books that I just love so much. And it's Fear of Flying by Erica Jong. And the reason why is because I think when the book was published, there were many things about that book that surprised people, that shocked people. And so that book kind of had some kind of reputation associated with it, associated with its content, particularly on female sexuality. But this day, if you were to kind of write a book about the same content, I think many people wouldn't bat an eye. Like, they wouldn't be shocked, they wouldn't be surprised. So there is something about that book which used to be shocking, is now it no longer has the same effect. But I love that book not because of how it shocked people, saucy content, but I just love the story. But I just can't help but to think how that book actually can be perceived differently today, and therefore does have an element that was a little bit outdated, or at least just dated, you know. So the last question is Trampoline Class. I've never done any trampoline before. I would love to, you know, jump on a trampoline because it looks so much fun. But anyway, the question is, what book do you absolutely love but is underrated? There's this one book that I read when I was at college. It was a kind of like a Russian classic but I don't think it is as famous as, you know, the usual names, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and it is by Ivan Goncharov. It's called Ablomov. I like this book, although when I read this book, I just can't help but feel really, really uncomfortable, because reading this book feels like looking into a mirror. You kind of see yourself in that character, and so it gets really, really uncomfortable. So this book is about this guy who lives in 19th century Russia, and he's kind of he's lazy, and he daydreams a lot, but he's not the kind of person who would be like really proactive and do work and do stuff. He has a lot of ideas. He's smart, and but that's as far as he goes. He does not put his thoughts into actions, and essentially this is a guy who is just content on lazing around all day and not doing anything, not lift a finger to work. So probably that's why it feels kind of uncomfortable reading about this character, because, you know, he kind of feels familiar. So those are the questions for Fit to Read tag. I just kind of find it interesting that I was tagged to do this recently, because at the same time I'm also kind of in the process of trying to make some changes into my lifestyle to be a little bit healthier. I'm trying to eat healthier. I'm trying to practice something a little bit different than what I used to do. Maybe try waking up a little bit earlier. Lately it has been kind of difficult to do that, because, you know, sometimes I would find myself waking up a little bit later than I intended to. So I am kind of trying to figure out how to do that, whether forcing yourself to wake up earlier is a good idea, or maybe try to think of an activity that you could do so that you feel more compelled to wake up earlier in the morning. I'm still kind of in the process of figuring that out. I'm not trying to introduce like so many new improvements and healthy lifestyles in my life at once. So I'm going to start slow. But anyway, I think I'm just gonna try that this week and see how it goes. Yeah, maybe I'll be able to have some extra time to read as well. I don't know, because that's another thing that I'm currently facing these few weeks. I have been having less time to read, and therefore I have, you know, less material for Bookish avec moi. But one thing that is kind of fun this week is I finished one book, and that book was an incredible book. Elizabeth Gaskell's Mary Barton. This was the book that I intentionally read slower, and I tried to read one chapter per day, and I finally finished it this weekend. And I think after doing that, it felt like I was able to kind of immerse myself in the story, in the setting, in the characters. It was so much fun. It felt like watching a TV show, because I was taking it really slowly and everything just get digested much better. It's kind of like eating your food slowly, and all of the nutrients is able to kind of absorb into your body like that. I'm not sure if that's how it works, but I suppose it makes sense a little bit. But anyway, with this book. So this book talks a lot about the struggles of the working class, especially in Victorian era, in a city called Manchester. And central to this book is the main character named Mary Barton, and she lives with her father. So one day her father does something kind of stupid. Not gonna tell you what it is because I came into this book not knowing what the father does, but it certainly drives a lot of the action in this book. It also drives a lot of action on Mary's part because, you know, she's a young woman, and at the beginning of this book she's not really doing much, but because of that she starts to have all of this worries and anxiety and do stuff because she needs to save the day. Yeah. But this book is also a very interesting one in that it also has this really strong social commentary angle, especially on class struggle, class differences, class mobility, how people between different classes interact with each other, and just pretty much the basic questions of human decency, like treat people nicely and stuff like that, you know. And another part that I really loved about this book is the psychological element. I really like how this book explores people's motivation. I think it does that really well. There are quite many characters in this book, and most of those characters have really strong motivations. At least from how I see it, I can understand why they act a certain way, because the author spends a long time trying to explain to us their motivation, and I find it she explains it in such a way that is quite rewarding and satisfying, and it does not sound like meandering or that, but it feels like you are reading something that is very substantial. So overall, this book was a lovely one, and I think this book is also Elizabeth Gaskell's first novel. I'm pretty sure 2021 I'll be reading more by Elizabeth Gaskell. Other things that I'm currently reading, I've been going super slow, seriously, because weekdays I don't think I read anything, and here I am on BookTube, like what on earth. But anyway, I am still reading with Kirsten from Kirsten 0929. This is Elena Ferrante's The Story of a New Name. Lovely book. We are going to get into our final week, so I'm not going to talk much about this book because I'll be talking a lot about this book once I finished it. And also another pretty nice book, and this one is by Zadie Smith. This is White Teeth, and I'm reading this with Wiebke from Book Life Over Worldling, and also Kristin from Need My Books and Coffee. Again, we are going to reach our final week for this book. On 29th, we'll have our end discussion for White Teeth, and so I'm not going to talk a lot about this one as well. Hence, that's what I said about me not having enough bookish material for Bookish avec moi. So I'll see you again in a different video. Until then, take care, thanks for watching, and goodbye.